When it comes to religious-themed horror, there are a few films out there worth watching, and when it comes to the early to mid-1990s, a few films really stand out in the dark, moody horror realm. These genres overlap quite a bit, and one stellar example of dark, moody religious horror is the 1995 film The Prophecy, starring Christopher Walken as the Archangel Gabriel, Elias Koteas, Virginia Madsen, Viggo Mortensen, Eric Stoltz, and Amanda Plummer. The film had a stacked cast for 1995, and it seemed to do decently in horror circles, but not so much outside of that. So, what happened to The Prophecy? What is The Prophecy about? While many see it as a partial horror film, the official genre it's in is fantasy thriller. Of course, in the 1990s and at random times before and since, the term horror is something many filmmakers and studios try to stay away from, and while others just embraced it. Horror has historically been the second best-selling genre of film overall. We can let you guess what the first one is. Let's start by stating that the film was not a flop, but a minor hit that led to 4 sequels, so it made enough to warrant us seeing future projects. The film itself is well loved by horror fans and others, but overall, the general public was and is still not that enamored by it. The story here follows an LA detective who discovers that a prophecy is coming true following a murder. Teaming up with a school teacher, he goes out of his normal jurisdiction to resolve the mystery and prevent the end of the world. This story is filled with religious ideology and imagery, connections to the Bible, angels, and different bits and pieces that come together to create a prophecy and its repercussions. Of course, the film has its own world it creates, and it uses the Bible very liberally, even creating a whole new chapter to John the Apostle's Book of Revelation to fit the needs of the film. This may not sit well with some viewers, but horror fans don't seem to mind. Overall, the love for this film seems to be quite niche, with reviewers aggregated on Rotten Tomatoes giving it an average of 46% fresh, so a rotten average, and the public giving the film 64% average, so not exactly rotten, but not great either. This seems to be the general public consensus through the years for this film. Films with religious themes seem to usually fall in the middle like this, with examples including Stigmata in 1999, Dogma, also from 1999, and a few others. The 1990s saw a few more religious films that were not all positive about the religion they depicted, something audiences are quite split on. If we're talking about films like The Exorcist, where the priests are the saviors and religion is the good guy, then the scores from reviewers and audiences alike are usually higher. Note, usually, which means the sequels to this film are a whole other thing. With that in mind, The Prophecy came with its fallen angel lead who may be a bad guy, something established within the story, but unclear from some of the marking and its rewriting of the Bible, adding a chapter and making up quotes such as,
"There were angels carrying savage weapons."
This did not sit well with many, thus creating a bit of controversy around the film. Thankfully, horror fans are used to controversy and to being called out for playing fast and loose with beliefs for the sake of fiction. Watching the film now, it's of course a little dated, but it's also entertaining, with an interesting take on the religious horror subgenre. Of course, these reviewers and public numbers, the averages being low to just okay, would lead one to believe the film was a flop. But as mentioned earlier, it was not exactly a flop. Numbers-wise, it did decent. The film was made for an estimated $8 million, which is on the lower side of things for a studio effort, even back then. But it was made under Weinstein and his studio Miramax, which means it was meant to be more of an independent film in a sort of way. Because the film was made in 1993, then released in 1995, so it was most likely greenlit before that. Also happening in 1993, the buyout of Miramax by the Walt Disney Company, who remained the owners up until 2010. While Disney owned Miramax, the Weinsteins were still in charge, so the films were made under their watchful eyes. To Disney, $8 million is chump change. To Miramax at the time, It was a decent budget. The film was shot in 1993 and released in 1995, a practice that seemed to be the way to go with the folks at Miramax, with some sources saying that the Weinsteins did this on purpose to allow for editing and then re-editing from their point of view, or with their notes. This would inevitably delay the release of anything they had their hands in producing. The first film in a series of 5, yes, 5, was one that had the pedigree to attract horror and fantasy fans, as well as cinema fans in general. The Prophecy was written and directed by Gregory Whiten, who is often linked to another great fantasy film, Highlander. On Highlander, he was one of the writers, and it was his very first film credit in 1986. Since then, before The Prophecy, he worked on the Highlander sequels, Backdraft, Weekend War, and on television series Space Rangers and Tales from the Crypt. Since The Prophecy, he has writing credits on the Prophecy sequels, of course, more Highlander sequels and the TV series, a few Hellraiser sequels, the Backdraft sequel, and a few more titles. As a director, his only film credit is The Prophecy, and he has also directed one Tales from the Crypt episode in 1993. So, his resume is spotty at best, but back when The Prophecy came out, he had some promising credits behind him. But for fantasy fans, Highlander is a big one, so he went in for The Prophecy expecting to love it. When it comes to the cast, this is where most people's attention would be caught. Christopher Walken as Gabriel is flat out a great choice. His credits have always been great, starting in 1953, so he was 40 years into his career at the time of shooting on this film. His previous credits are varied and numerous, including The Sentinel, The Dead Zone, A Feud to a Kill, Communion, King of New York, McBain, Batman Returns, True Romance, and Wayne's World 2, to name but a few. The man was established with a capital E. He even had a few horror titles in there and a few films that were already cult films or on the verge of becoming cult films. He clearly was the best choice here. Working with him as Thomas, a name that was absolutely not accidental, is Elias Koteas, a man most of us remember as Casey Jones in the first and third Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles live-action films.
You know, a little Primatine might just help to clear that up there.
But at the time of The Prophecy's release, he was also known for his work on Some Kind of Wonderful, Blood River, Desperate Hours, Almost an Angel, Cyborg 2, and more. The man was and still is quite active, with lots of good roles on his resume. In a 2011 interview, he said that he, quote, was given an opportunity, a great character, but he just felt he missed the boat on that one, unquote, when talking about his part as Thomas Daggett in The Prophecy. Fans of the film would beg to differ here. Playing Mary here is Virginia Madsen, who had recently been in Candyman, and thus very familiar to horror fans. Eric Stoltz played Simon, another character named after the Bible, and was known to genre fans for his work on The Fly 2, but was also known for Say Anything, Pulp Fiction, Killing Zoe, and a bunch more. They were joined by Viggo Mortensen as Lucifer, a man who needs no introduction these days, but back in 1995, he was known to horror fans for his part in Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3. To others, he was known as a character actor for movies like Witness, Young Guns 2, The Reflective Skin, Carlito's Way, American Yakuza, and a bunch more. The cast for The Prophecy was not only well-rounded and carefully selected, but it was also filled with respected actors. The film was eventually released in theaters on September 1st, 1995. The film hit number 3 on box office that weekend, just behind Mortal Kombat at number 1 and Dangerous Minds at number 2. Mortal Kombat, for better or for worse, had a much larger marketing campaign, a much larger budget at $20 million, and a built-in fan base who were looking forward to the film. The fact it hit number 1 is not surprising, and neither is the fact that it stayed at number 1 for 3 weeks. Now, whether the film being good or bad is a whole other thing. Dangerous Minds was a film with a big push as well, a solid lead in Michelle Pfeiffer, and a potential award season early entry. It also had a larger budget and a wider appeal with its underdog kid story that was made to appeal to a larger part of the population. The fact that The Prophecy came in third below these two shows that it had something that appealed to some audiences. The Prophecy had less than half the budget for each of those films, and it lacked both a previously established fan base and award buzz. In terms of box office, the amounts of money the other films made were fairly large, over $122 million for Mortal Kombat and over $179 million for Dangerous Minds. They were big hits for 1995. So, how much did The Prophecy make while fighting for attention in theaters against these two? The total box office for The Prophecy is listed at $16.1 million. That is not a whole lot in comparison, but it's enough for the film to make its budget and cost back with a bit of profit, especially once the home video market is taken into consideration. In terms of home video, the film did find an audience there for sure, as well as on cable television, as the mid to late 1990s were a great time for this. The Prophecy was released on video in March 1996, and eventually made its way through the different levels of cable television, starting with pay-per-view, then premium channels, and eventually making it to basic channels where some of them cut bits and pieces here and there to be able to include the ad breaks. These days, it's available on DVD and Blu-ray, as well as streaming on and off, seemingly consistently changing platforms. Having Christopher Walken as the sole face on the poster and artwork usually associated with the film definitely still helps it get seen by random people looking for something fun to watch, but it's more of a cult film than something folks easily recognize and pick up these days. Today, The Prophecy seems to have disappeared from the general consciousness, but it still comes up here and there and has a dedicated fan base that truly loves it. It's one of those films that is worth tracking down and checking out. Its sequels are varying quality, with a drop in positive reviews that keeps dropping and dropping with each subsequent sequel. Nonetheless, the sequels are interesting to check out, even if just to see how they keep making those.
In 1995, Gregory Wyden, writer of Backdraft and Highlander, set out to tell a story about the darker side of angels with The Prophecy, formerly known as Demons and God's Army. The story involved an archangel named Gabriel, played by the absolute legend that is Christopher Walken, who had become jealous of God's love for human beings, or, as he referred to us, monkeys. Does that make Ross from Friends our daddy? I knew some ladies and men in the 90s that would have totally been into... Look, we're getting sidetracked. Anyway, the hurt was so deep for Gabriel and these fallen angels that it caused a civil war in heaven between the obedient angels and the rebellious ones. Meanwhile on earth, a very bad man dies and his soul is so evil that whichever side retrieved it, it would completely alter the ESPN win probability rate in their favour. So, Gabriel comes to earth to retrieve it and turn heaven into hell by doing so, but has his plot foiled by some good folk and Lucifer, who's probably a less good person, but did happen to be wearing Viggo Mortensen. So, that's cool. The film was an extremely cool idea with a killer cast that included everyone from Pulp Fiction's Eric Stoltz to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles' Elias Koteas, but also suffered from pacing and heady exposition. The one thing everyone could agree on was that Christopher Walken playing a bloodthirsty evil angel was a stroke of pure genius. In the end, the film doubled its $8 million budget and, as you would typically expect, was resurrected and brought back for a sequel that recast Christopher Walken in the main role again and was released straight to home video. Okay, that's right folk, this was a Dimension Films property, and this is what the fuck happened to The Prophecy 2. Look, I'm gonna be honest with you.
You have an absolutely breathtaking hiney.
This movie is somehow a ghost in the machine. For a film produced and distributed by a film studio where the stories are never ending, there's simply not a lot out there about The Prophecy 2. Which is a shame, because it's an insanely weird and entertaining movie. What we do know is that for whatever reason, original creator Gregory Wyden would come back as writer in characters written by, status only, and would be replaced in the director's chair by a man who just impressed Dimension Films executives with his work on their other direct-to-video property, Children of the Corn 4, The Gathering. Yep, someone was impressed by Children of the Corn 4, The Gathering. Please don't make me say it a third time. That man was Greg Spence, and The Prophecy 2 would be the last movie he directed to this day. Don't feel too bad for him, however, because he went on to be a producer of projects such as Game of Thrones and The Last of Us TV series. He's doing just dandy. Spence would go on to tell Cinefantastique that he was quite happy with the experience of directing The Prophecy 2 for the executives at Dimension Films in the mid-90s, which will definitely make you question whether or not he was being held at gunpoint. Blink twice if you're in danger, Greg. Spence was teamed up with Matt Greenberg, who would go on to write Halloween H2O, 1408, and the Pet Sematary remake, among other things. And they were told that the Weinsteins wanted Walken back as Gabriel and also wanted the Archangel Michael added into the fray. The crew then dug into Genesis in the Bible and came up with a story that not only tied into the original film, but also amped up the entertainment factor. As Spence put it himself, "We were interested in seeing the interesting elements of mythology kept, but making the film a little more genre, a little racier, and maybe a little more scary than the first one." They undoubtedly succeeded in making The Prophecy 2 fit the trappings of the horror genre at the time. The deeply serious tones of the original, which were sometimes welcome and other times boring, are replaced here with more action, Walken one-liners, and a faster-paced storyline with a brisk hour and 23-minute runtime. Gah, miss them, do you? Walken was as entertaining as ever, and it wasn't by accident. Spence says, "We had a lot of fun with Walken's lines, and they purposefully infused a fish-out-of-water storyline for the character of Gabriel. Here's this guy who's ultra-powerful, bloodthirsty, and scary as hell. An evil archangel who's been around so long he's literally the one who told Mary she was pregnant with Jesus, and he's completely bested by an MS-DOS computer in a dry cleaner's office." It's genuinely hilarious and entertaining. Walken knows exactly what we want, and he's not afraid to give it to us. Vulcan Angel pinching humans left and right with a tap on the head and a shush as they drop immediately to the floor as he floats by them with the seriousness of a man shopping for potato chips.
What the?
He's also capable of carrying the same vengeful tenacity he had during his scariest moments in the first movie. Walken puts quite a show in what is, dare I say, his most underappreciated performance. The entire film has many similarities to its predecessor, but is a whole heck of a lot quicker and infused with a lot more fun. It's almost reminiscent of an Evil Dead to Evil Dead 2 type of scenario, where the film feels the same only, slightly drunk and much more carefree. Even the plot is alike in many ways. Where the original story was about Gabriel coming to Earth to steal an evil soul, The Prophecy 2 focuses on Gabriel being kicked out of hell, with Lucifer claiming that hell wasn't big enough for the both of them. It's like that movie House Guest with Sinbad, only it's Satan, and it's actually nothing like that whatsoever. If you're like me, you're probably imagining Satan kicking Gabriel out like Uncle Phil would to Jazzy Jeff in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. The front gate of hell opens and Christopher Walken comes flying out with the devil slamming the door behind him. It's not, unfortunately, but it's the next best thing when it decides to shamelessly borrow from James Cameron's The Terminator. Here, Lucifer kisses his fingertips in a very uncomfortably close shot of his lips so that he can't tell that Viggo Mortensen was recast, then wipes them across the pavement of the street like a cop about to taste the bad guy's cocaine to make sure it's real. We all know why you do it, guys, come on. Next thing you know, there's lightning everywhere, the street opens up volcano style, a CGI car melts into it, and out of it crawls a butt-naked Christopher Walken, covered in goo and all I can think in this moment is, if he's not got any clothes or pockets, we all know where he's keeping that pocket watch. However you want to slice it, Gabriel is back on Earth, and once again he's on a mission. This time it's to stop a Nephilim from being born, which in this case is someone who doesn't rewind their videotapes before returning them to the video store. Actually, it's a half baby / half angel that would eventually be the bridge to peace between the angels holding a Jerry Springer marathon upstairs. This was all prophesied by Thomas Daggett, who is now played by Reanimator's Bruce Abbott, instead of Elias Koteas. Because it's the 90s, man, there's no rules. Gabriel goes on the hunt for Sarah Connor, Nurse Valerie, played by the wide-eyed and game for anything Jennifer Beals, who moments before had just experienced the reverse version of that scene from Don't Be a Menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood, where Dashiki sleeps with Lock Dog and realises she's pregnant 2 minutes later.
I'm pregnant.
Already? Are you sure?
I got 7 kids. I think I know what I'm talking about.
After sleeping with an angel, after accidentally hitting him with a car. This is what dudes had to do to get dates before the internet, people. So the angel she slept with, Danielle, go on the run to protect the angel monkey in her stomach as the T-1000, Gabriel, hunts them down. I think you probably get the subtle point I'm trying to make here. This movie is more influenced by the Terminator than that kid from Halloween 2018 was influenced by girls feeding him guacamole and all those sexy kinds of ways. I'm not complaining, it's a blast. Gabriel is once again on the warpath as he finds Thomas from the previous film, once again now a totally different human being, and drops a haunting one-liner on him before lightning sets him on fire.
It's a small step. Profit, the order. Can you take it?
Which is something he'll do multiple times throughout the film. Still yet, the Terminator franchise comparisons don't stop, as the Prophecy 2 goes as far as borrowing from the fish out of water storyline from Terminator 2, and to great success. Gabriel realises quickly that he doesn't know how to use computers, guns, cars, or even walkie-talkies, and brings back to life a young girl who's just committed suicide with her boyfriend by smashing their car into a concrete wall so they could be together forever in the afterlife. This absolute shot of 90s life is Izzy, played by the forever unforgettable Brittany Murphy in a role that was perfect for her. Gabriel tells Izzy that he's not going to let her be with her boyfriend in the afterlife until she helps him complete his mission. But do you think the plot explanation ends here? Think again. Our hunter/prey storyline ends up in Eden from the Bible, where the Archangel Michael first makes his appearance, played by none other than karate angel Eric effing Roberts. The best of the best indeed. Danielle and Valerie came here looking for solace, but found it to be less Eden-y and more the literal steel warehouse from the Terminator. The explanation for Eden becoming a Freddy Krueger boiler room is that it became an industrial wasteland, due to everything going on with Wars of Heaven, which was convenient for the budget, I guess. Anyway, Eric Roberts is here, and he's a badass. Gabriel shows up, and he and Michael have one hell of an Archangel to Archangel, Al Pacino and Robert De Niro dining room heat moment before Gabriel continues his chase that leads to both Danielle and Izzy dying. This all leads to Arnold Schwarzenegger being slowly levelled into a pit of volcano juice with his thumbs up. Wait a minute, got me lines crossed again. It ends with Gabriel and Valerie on a moving steel apparatus that seems like something out of one of the dungeon levels from Super Mario Bros. Here, she reveals to Gabriel that God may not speak to him, but he does speak to her. Man, he's busy, bro. Overcome with pain and jealousy and yet another great acting moment for Walken, he asks her what God says to her. She says, jump, before she grabs him, and they both plummet to the ground, where Gabriel is impaled on a spike, but she is left unharmed. Man, that's some Scream 6 character level look right there. Good for you, Valerie. The film comes to a halt, with Michael turning Gabriel into a human being as punishment for being such a world-class prick. We last see him begging for change on a street corner across from a payphone and ranting that
Phone's gonna ring. It's gonna be you know who. Everything's gonna be made right. Phone's gonna ring.
this sets us all up perfectly for another sequel of Walken/Gabriel badassery. Valerie decides to raise the child alone, and the film leaves us with a powerful statement about how you can't let the fear of the future stop you from raising your kids with love. The exact place we all knew the horror movie about rage-filled angels was going to lead us. It's really an amazing accomplishment that this direct-to-video sequel manages to be so quickly paced and full of fun and action. So much is going on in this hour and 23 minutes that we haven't even yet mentioned that in the most random of all movie cameos, Glenn Danzig of the Misfits, and well, you know, Danzig, plays an angel named Samael, who dies in a street fight that's a direct callback to the first Prophecy film. It's the one where they smell each other like Schwarzenegger smelling bad guys coming downhill in Commando, and leap out of windows multiple stories high to meet mid-air just to hug violently and fall back to the ground. I'm not sure why we felt the need to do this exact scene again, but why not? Let's run it back, only this time we're going to use Danzig and he's going to get his heart ripped out of his chest. Just for funsies. Who wants a margarita? Somehow, someway, Dimension Films' Greg Spence and Matt Greenberg teamed up and managed to get not only an even better performance out of Walken than the first time around, but gave the film an entirely new spirit by casting the charismatic and lovable Brittany Murphy. Even if Izzy is a total, to borrow a phrase from Brad Pitt's Detective Mills in Seven,
A nutbag. You're a movie of the week.
who keeps trying to shoot herself in diners so she can be with her boyfriend in the afterlife. It's provocative. It gets the people going. Dimension couldn't bring back everyone, but they did some nice cast finagling to get around the departure of Vigo, the Luciferian, and Elias Koteas. Actually, the only returning star, besides Walken, was the scene-stealing Steve Heitner as the morgue doctor, who does his own entertaining version of the "You're all doomed" guy from Friday the 13th here. In the end, The Prophecy 2 is a direct-to-video sequel that may be an afterthought due to the circumstances, but really shouldn't have been. The film clearly features a director, writer and cast who were very invested even as they worked the dusk until dawn schedule 6 nights a week while filming. Still, the director said, "It was a great bunch of people to stay up all night with, and I think you can tell by everyone's engaging performances just how game everyone was for this wild little movie." Who wouldn't have fun with this batshit crazy story that involves Christopher Walken walking around melting people's faces, literally and physically? And that, my friends, is what the fuck happened to The Prophecy 2. What's your favourite Christopher Walken performance of all time? It's impossible to choose for me, but I'll certainly tell you the weirdest you'll ever see. 1989's Communion. Walken being probed by aliens. Or is he probing them? Thank me later. Have a great day.
Nephilim. Half angel, half man.
Are you saying Daniel's a Nephilim?
I need the heart. You more than anyone know what he is. He's their last hope.
After two movies, 1995's The Prophecy and 1998's The Prophecy 2, Christopher Walken's leading antagonist Gabriel undergoes a spiritual makeover that fans of the first two films couldn't have seen coming. After back-to-back films of Walken setting objects and people on fire, among other acts of evil, Archangel Gabriel proved just how sinister he could be. So what made him change his tune? Find out what happened on WTF Happened to The Prophecy 3, The Ascent. Christopher Walken was the first of a handful of actors to sign up for 1995's The Prophecy. The stellar cast included Elias Koteas, Virginia Madsen, Eric Stoltz, and Viggo Mortensen. The film told a fascinating supernatural story of Archangel Gabriel coming down to Earth to carry out his plan of turning Earth into hell by combating a police detective and a school teacher. On an $8 million budget, it became a minor hit, earning $16 million in the US. Dimension moved forward with a sequel, betting that Walken's involvement would equal a successful home video release. The wacky but endearing Prophecy 2 racked up a decent amount of online chatter and sold a respectable number of copies, with Walken being game to do a third entry. Dimension put the wheels in motion for the Prophecy 3. The original Prophecy was written and directed by Highlander creator Gregory Widen. The sequel was co-written by horror screenwriter Matt Greenberg, who also wrote Halloween H2O, the Stephen King adaptation 1408, and the 2019 remake of Pet Sematary, and Greg Spence, who would also direct. At the time, Spence had one directing credit with Children of the Corn 4, The Gathering, but he went on to produce HBO heavyweights Game of Thrones and The Last of Us. For the third installment, screenwriting and directing duties were split. Carl Dupree and Joel Soyson penned the screenplay. They would team up again on the Hellraiser sequel, Hellworld. Soyson would also write future sequels, The Prophecy Uprising and The Prophecy Forsaken. He would also write the Wes Craven-produced Dracula trilogy, which would be directed by The Prophecy 3's director, Patrick Lussier. Lussier is a skilled talent behind some of the most iconic horror films of the last 30 years. As an editor, he worked on 90s horror classics such as Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Halloween H2O, and the original Scream trilogy. The Prophecy 3 was his directorial debut. After The Prophecy 3, he directed the 2009 remake of My Bloody Valentine, episodes of TV show adaptations of horror franchises, Scream and The Purge, among other works. More recently, he helmed the horror film Play Dead, starring Bailey Madison and Jerry O'Connell. The Prophecy 3 was released almost 2 years after its predecessor. It would focus on a Nephilim, which is a half-angel, half-human, who is conceived and hunted in Part 2. Here, he's hunted as an adult. The Nephilim in question is Daniel Rosales, played by Dave Buzada. Daniel is a street preacher who believes that the universe is purposeless and random, ranting in his sermon that
our lives are nothing but a chain of unrelated accidents. Get used to it!
Get used to it!
Daniel is hunted by a doomsday prepping psychopath, and an archangel who's just been sent to Earth by Pyreal, an angel who plans to overrule God and subsequently all of mankind. They both want Daniel dead, as he is the last hope for humanity. Daniel holds a gathering in a tent with his sickeningly supportive girlfriend Maggie and about 40 of his followers. The meeting proves dangerous when the aforementioned psychopath, aka genre icon Brad Dourif, simply known in the credits as Zealot, stands in front of the crowd and opens fire on Daniel, shooting him in the chest a whopping 13 times, more than doubling Dr. Loomis's numbers. We see another familiar face in Joseph, the county coroner, played by Steve Heitner in his third appearance of the franchise. A quick glance at Daniel's bullet-riddled chest prompts Joseph to pronounce him dead, and a quick glance at his name reminds him of Daniel's mother, Valerie Rosales, with whom Joseph had spoken to briefly in years prior when she was pregnant with Daniel. Joseph looks up Valerie's records. It turns out, Daniel's mother died from a crushing case of sudden sequel death syndrome. Valerie Rosales, played by Jennifer Beals in The Prophecy 2, is given a similar treatment to Laurie Strode in Halloween 4, getting axed off-screen prior to the film's events. Well, not literally axed. She was set on fire. Daniel is taken to the morgue, but is very much alive. Because he's part angel, and even more so because he's a Nephilim, Daniel is hard to kill, and can only die if his heart is destroyed. Like, thoroughly destroyed. Then stepped on, and run over just in case. This is why Charles Lee Wright blasted him 13 times and didn't see it as overkill. Joseph catches Daniel up and walking, right before Daniel runs away. Joseph then meets the second entity that's hunting Daniel, Archangel Zophiel Jones, played by Vincent Spano, who I'll be referring to as Z to avoid confusion with Gabriel, Daniel, and Pyril. I could call him Jones, but he acts too robotic to be referred to with a human name. Joseph is so bewildered by the night's events that he starts hitting the books and hitting the booze. He aims to solve the bizarre mysteries regarding Daniel. On the plus side, he has Maggie drive him home, so at least he drinks somewhat responsibly.
You drive.
Back in Brad Dourif's apartment, he talks to an unseen presence that is apparently the driving force behind Brad shooting Daniel. He's rejected when pleading for another chance to kill Daniel. Then he is killed by this invisible force, which Brad considers to be an honor. And that's the last we see of Brad Dourif in this movie, unfortunately. The following day, Z tracks Daniel down at a donut shop of all places. Daniel is healing from being shot, which apparently causes a voracious appetite. Daniel eats about a dozen donuts and pours an entire sugar bowl into his coffee, or as sugar addicts call it, Tuesday morning. Gabriel runs over Z, allowing Daniel to escape again. So it would appear Gabriel is human, but also some type of guardian angel to Daniel.
Everywhere I go, you're there. I close my eyes, you're there.
An altercation between Gabriel and Z results in some offbeat hilarity. After Z threatens his life, Gabriel awesomely shuts him down by saying,
"Fried food can kill me. A mugger can kill me. You're not so special down here, Jones."
Z finds Daniel inside the tent where he was shot. They engage in a fight similar to the ones in the original and the sequel. The angels collide midair. Z spins and lands perfectly balanced on his feet, raising the serious question of why he's not an Olympic figure skater. Daniel pins Z to the wall with what appears to be a steel pipe. He questions Z about a weird symbol drawn in blood that he found in Brad Dourif's apartment. Z tells Daniel that it is the symbol of Pyril, referring to him as the next god. Apparently, Pyril is supposed to be an ominous and deadly being, but his name just reminds me of Purell hand sanitizer, so I can't take him seriously. On a mission to find Pyril in the desert, Daniel hurls a random man off of his motorcycle, takes his bike, and literally leaves him in the dust. I feel like he could have just as easily taken, say, a Toyota Corolla, but this was just too dramatic to resist. In parts 1 and 2, Gabriel forces unwilling people to drive him around, as he couldn't drive until this movie. Since driving is apparently a skill no Archangel has, Z follows that tradition and has Maggie drive him to follow Daniel.
Can't drive. I believe this can go faster.
When they catch up to Daniel in the desert, Z fights Maggie, trying to take control of the steering wheel in an attempt to run Daniel over. But Daniel remains unharmed and Maggie's car flips over. Daniel and Z fight again. Before he can destroy Daniel's heart, Maggie shoots Z, despite her fragile condition. Daniel rips his heart out, killing him. Even though he's distraught over Maggie, he must leave her behind to fight Pyril so he can save her. And, the rest of mankind. Gabriel stays with a barely conscious Maggie. Pyril and Daniel give us some more angel-on-angel fighting. Suddenly, Pyril is struck by lightning, which I'm sure is just a coincidence. Gaining the upper hand, Daniel stabs Pyril in the chest, defeating him. A symbol on Gabriel's neck reveals he's an angel once again. He revives Maggie so she and Daniel can be together. Gabriel offers Daniel his perspective on Daniel's belief that life is unjustly random.
It's not a mindless, indifferent, blind universe. It never was. Get used to it.
Despite its short runtime, The Prophecy 3 is quirky, uniquely charming and even poignant, especially in the last few scenes. Gabriel had to become what he was most jealous of in order to come full circle and appreciate humanity. He had to live in a world where he could risk getting hurt or killed or eating a questionable Big Mac. He had to become human. Though it took 3 movies, Gabriel receives a proper redemption arc. The Prophecy 3 feels like a finale, as there are a few fulfilled arcs and some closure that includes callbacks to the original. Mary, the little girl who gets possessed and almost kidnapped in part 1, shows up in Daniel's dream. On his way to confront Pyrrhil, Daniel meets Mary, played by the same actress, Mariah Shining Duff Snyder. She reveals that she had a dream about him, and that she believes he can defeat Pyrrhil, even though she doesn't seem to have any idea who Daniel is. Gabriel stops at the Halfway House coffee shop, a diner he'd gone to in the original. Madge, portrayed by Sandra Ellis Lafferty, the same person who waited on him before, waits on him again. The cameos feel reminiscent of Scream 3, but at least here, the cameos are of characters we've met before. No offense to the late, great Carrie Fisher. As mentioned, Steve Heitner returns as Joseph, the coroner. He's once again the deliverer of odd news to a leading character, this time learning the importance of Daniel being a Nephilim and who Pyrrhil and Zilphael are, and explaining this to Maggie, who probably normally wouldn't believe him, but since her boyfriend is capable of easily surviving 13 bullet wounds, she's a little more open-minded. The Prophecy 3 scored a meager 17% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, but in its defense, it received very few reviews from critics, likely due to its direct-to-video release, and the fact that it's a horror sequel. Critics probably felt it was too lowbrow to review. Also on Rotten Tomatoes, it scored a 40% audience approval rating and a 5.4 out of 10 from users on IMDb. While the film shows its budget and age, it wastes no time, breezing through its story in an hour and 21 minutes. Walken carries this film on his back, or on his wings, I should say. I would say he carries the trilogy on his wings, but there's some debate on Viggo Mortensen possibly out-Walkening Walken in the original. The Prophecy 3, The Ascent, is a solid ending for Gabriel. Here, our leading archangel has some heroic moments and redeems himself in a sugary sweet 180. But he did get to have a lot of fun as an archangel in the Prophecy 1 and 2. Which version of Gabriel do you prefer? Evil or good? Let us know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.